Well, I really appreciate you doing this, Marcy, and I'm excited to talk with you about storytelling. And I think you're just a perfect person, especially right now, that I get to have this conversation with. So, but before we jump in, obviously this is goes out to a lot of St. Andrews folks,
Yes.
but I share it on Facebook, and then I found out that other people share it with their friends, and so
Good.
more people than just our St. Andrews crew watch this. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for those who aren't familiar with you and don't know you? What do you do? Where do you come from? Any kind of stuff about your family you want to share? Just kind of give people a picture of who Marcy McKay is.
Okay, well, thanks, Jared. I'm excited to talk to you about storytelling. My name is Marcy McKay. I am a cradle Episcopalian. I was born in Amarillo. St. Andrews, where you are the rector, is the church I grew up in. My parents were married in that church. My father was buried in that church. Mark and I were married there. My children were baptized there in the school gymnasium because it was after the fire at St. Andrews. And you know, as far since the whole focus of our talk is about storytelling, I want to tell you a story.
Good, good. I was hoping you would.
Years before I had children, in 1995, Mark McKay and I had been married at about 5 years at that point. We had been in Amarillo, where we both grew up. We had moved there from Austin, and it was the fall of 1995, and it was the fall of 1995, and a voice woke me up from a dream, and it said, "I want you to write a book." And I rolled over to Mark and I said, "What did you say?" And he was sound asleep. And I thought, I'm dreaming. So I roll over and I go back to sleep, and I hear the voice again. "I want you to write a book." And I'm like really asleep. And it's, you know I've heard the voice once before, and I think the TV must be on. So I'm feeling around for the remote and find it, the TV's off. And so I go back to sleep, and a third time the voice wakes me up from a solid sleep and says, "I want you to write a book." Okay, so Jared, it's the middle of the night. My husband's sound asleep. The TV's not on. I'm stone cold sober, and I'm hearing voices. In true Marcy form, I freak out. So, the next day I start bemoaning, what am I going to do with all this fame and fortune? I'm obviously about to become just this mega bestseller. Stephen King, won't be able to see the glare of my, brightness. Who's going to babysit my children who aren't even born yet? When Katie Couric on the Today Show wants to interview me, I just go wackadoodle Marcy.
Yeah.
And really, it was my college roommate from Baylor said, why don't you shut up and write this book first, and then worry about your fame and fortune. And so that kind of started everything. And I wasn't like a writer in college. I guess I kind of was. I always loved books. I always loved movies. I've always loved storytelling. And I was a public relations major at Baylor. And so that was through the School of Journalism. Because of that, I had to write for the school paper. And so, I had a background of writing, always loved to write, but I never saw myself as an author. For some reason, that seemed like a magical thing for other people. But that kind of started me off on this journey. And I think when God calls us to do something, that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. The Bible has one or two of stories that illustrates that point.
Right.
So,
I love that story about you waking up in the middle of the night. Speaking about stories in the Bible, it reminds me of Samuel and Eli, when Samuel was a little boy and God kept waking him up from the dream.
Oh, yeah.
and Eli told him to go back to bed like 4 times, and then yeah.
Right. Right.
So,
And so, I've had people ask me recently if I've heard that voice again. And
mhm,
it's sort of, I haven't heard it that clearly the way, but I have felt that voice along the way, especially in hard times, because, whatever you're doing, life is not easy. And so
mhm,
I feel like, because of my faith, that voice was God. And so I haven't, had it that clear before, but I have felt and sensed that it was that same voice when times were hard. And an agent, the 100th agent, and I'm not
mhm,
joking, the 100th agent rejected my first book that's under the bed and will never see the light of day. But
mhm.
things like that. And so,
Yeah, yeah,
life is very, very much a journey.
yeah. Tell me, I'm just curious. I haven't known you very long,
Right.
and because of COVID, I've known you via Zoom. But whether we're on Vestry or some other kind of meeting or this, you're a great storyteller.
Oh,
And
thank you.
then I've been able to start reading your new book, which we'll come to here in a minute.
Right.
Um, but it's something I appreciate about you. You tell a good story. You use your hands. You're a physical storyteller too. I can pick up on that even through the screen. Um, who did you grow up around storytellers?
Yes, my father, Roy Mason, was very much a storyteller. He didn't write down his stories, but my father was a big man, like 6'3", 300 pounds. And so when Roy Mason walked into a room, he commanded a
Yeah,
room, and you would
yeah.
always find him with a circle of people around him telling.
Hmm.
Now, stories that my mom and brother or sister had heard 1,000 times, but he always had a crowd around him laughing at his stories. And so
Hmm.
really captivated people. And I learned from my father that the only difference between fact and fiction is how much you heap on top of it, if you hear what
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah, yes,
saying.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do write both fiction and nonfiction. And so as far as storytelling goes, I went down the nonfiction route. Oh, and I have to pause since I just saw my hands. My husband teases me, wondering, if you tied up my hands, would I become mute? That kind of thing. But yeah, I think people, we just identify with stories, whether it's a book or a movie. It just takes us to another place.
Hmm.
And that's what helps us connect to one another. And I think, since we are doing this conversation during, flat dab in the middle of the coronavirus, I think stories have been huge. I mean, we've all been reading stories and binge watching movies and TV shows, and you'll get online and say, okay, I finished this series, I need another one. I mean, we need,
Hmm.
in fact, that's the way Mark and I end most evenings, is watching a couple of very light, fluffy sitcoms. I need that oomph and that laughter to keep
Yeah,
going. Like,
yeah,
I adored Game of Thrones. I
yeah.
adored it. Man, I could not be watching it right now. Winter is
Right,
coming. Winter here.
right, right.
So
That is right.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I know you've been reading, is it Lord of the Rings you've been reading to your son?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Simon and I've been reading that together. Yeah.
Yeah. So what has he been connect? I mean, one, just to have that father-son time
Yeah.
on, but what is he seeing through the storytelling?
Well, and he's an audiobook guy, so he reads a lot faster than his
And you
dad.
know what? And that counts. I know a lot of
Yeah.
people who feel like audiobooks don't count, and I'm like,
Yeah.
1,000%. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
We
I
all
wish I could I wish I could do it. You know what I mean? I just can't. I can't process the words.
Right.
But Erica and Simon, they do audiobooks a lot. He loves. I mean, like any kiddo, he gets wrapped up in this, like the story, the characters, the
Right.
adventure. He's a big Harry Potter fan too,
Right.
and for the same reason.
Right.
And I think he likes those series because he and his brother have also been going through the Percy Jackson
Oh, love that.
series. And
Yeah.
so I think anything like that where you can get sucked into another world and you
Right.
start I think they love that stuff. I mean, that's why I love that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So back to where the storytelling came from me, one, it definitely originated with my father, but then I grew up going to elementary school at St. Andrew's Episcopal School.
Okay.
And when I was in fourth grade, we had a teacher named Miss Wakefield. And if we were good, at the end of the day, she would read us a chapter of whatever book we were reading at the time. And of course, I don't think we ever missed it. I mean, this was like a group of 20 kids. And that's where we heard books or like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Arabian Nights, Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, A Little Princess, The Secret Garden, Arabian Nights. I mean, that was the first time I ever heard of Oompa Loompas. And I was like, that's the coolest thing ever, getting to live in a chocolate factory. And so I loved that concept of, yes, we were actually in the basement of our church at this Episcopal school, but I was whisked away to London and going through, England and going through a chocolate factory, and, each naughty little child gets knocked out of the contest. And I loved being transported to another place. So I think there is nothing more delicious or divine than Once Upon a Time,
Yeah. And you mentioned faith a few minutes ago. How's this for you? For me, what draws me more and more to the church, to the scriptures, to traditions within our any kind of religious tradition is the story. Like I don't think I'm a priest because the canons really turn me on. You know what I mean? Like or
rules.
the rules. That's right. Or doctrinal statements.
Right.
It's the stories. Like every time Jesus says "Once upon a time,"
right,
man, do you know what I mean? Can you speak to that in your own life? Do you feel that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think whether it's stories or friendships or the people I follow, whether it's through their books or online, or people like I consider mentors, it's because I connect to them and they're willing. The people I connect to the most are the ones who are willing to be vulnerable and to really share from their heart their authentic selves. And I think that's, back to Harry Potter, I think that's why he's so huge, is because he's a reluctant hero. He was this orphan in a really crappy situation because his parents were dead, and had lived with this awful aunt and uncle. But then he discovers he has these powers, and he's goes off on this journey. And so that's what I connect to with faith, because faith is hard. Faith is so easy when the marriage is good and there's plenty of money in the bank and everyone's happy and healthy. I feel myself getting emotional. Faith is hard right now. It is hard right now because we are living in dark times. And I'm, what little you've gotten to know of me, Jared, hopefully you see, I mean, I'm a happy girl, I'm an optimist, but we are living in tough times. And it's not just the coronavirus, it's everything else, all interconnected. I mean, for those watching this, those of us who live in the United States, the very divided political climate. For some of us, we'd say the past 8 years. For others, they'd say the past 12 or 20 years. I mean,
Mhm.
that is really, really tough that we've got pretty much the country divided in half in how we see the world. Then back to COVID. Is it real? Is it not real? Is it a political hoax? No, I pay attention to science. Math help? No, they hurt. And so got that. Then all the social justice issues like George Floyd being killed. There's some people who can't stop talking about it, and there's others who are like, let's not talk about politics. Facebook should just be for happy cat videos. And
Yeah.
it's really that. And then there's this other layer. It's all your individual stress that come into play and how you're responding to all this. So it's all layers on top of layers on top of layers. And there's just a lot. Everything feels intensified because we are wired for community. Our bodies and our brains, our subconscious mind, even though, we are all very modern in 2020 with our almond milk cappuccinos and whatnot, our brains still think that we are cavemen and we are fighting saber-toothed tigers, and that's all that our subconscious mind does. It's going safe, not safe, safe, not safe. So we've been cut off. We've been told to quarantine at home. That freaks out our subconscious mind because we are wired for community. So that's upsetting to us. Our subconscious mind likes familiar because that's safe. We've never been through anything like this before. That adds to the intensity. And so all the arguments, is this real? Is it not real? So everything feels magnified. I mean, I can remember early on in the pandemic, the anniversary of my father's death is April 3rd. So April 3rd of this year was the, oh my gosh, the 33rd anniversary of my father's death. So, I mean, Jared, this is something I have long since dealt with and grieved. And so on the day of, did I say April 3rd? No, April 2nd is the day my dad died. So that day, I didn't want to feel it because, I had too many overwhelming emotions. About a week later, it straight up kicked my ass. And I just found myself in a puddle of tears. And once I grieved that, because it just felt so much more intense, I was able to let it go and move on. And it probably wasn't a week, but everything feels more intense. So when something good happens right now, it feels great. When you're mad about something, I mean, just everything. And so we're all, it takes so much energy to hold space for all these mixed emotions.
Listening to you talking about those layers of everything we're all of us are walking through right now. Each one of those layers is a story.
Yeah.
And we're trying to figure out what stories to believe, right, and what stories to tell.
Because it's connected to our past. It's not just the stories today. It's connected to something from way, way, way long ago. Yeah.
I mean, do we choose to tell our children stories about the civil rights movement and how it's still not through, or do we choose to tell them stories that it's not that bad? Right. I mean, I think one big common thing that we're all experiencing right now is the struggle to find what stories to tell.
Right.
What stories? This is a leading question because I want to get to your new book. What stories do you think we need to be telling right now? Because there are stories that heal, even though they come with some pain associated, but there's also stories that just are unhelpful and they just hurt.
Right.
So what stories do we need to be listening to and telling right now?
I think we all, ooh, that's a great question. I think we all have to be honest with ourselves and really dig deep to all the stories from our past, because some of them are fact and some of them are fiction. And what I mean by that, we all kind of have these triggers. Especially, it's easier to deal with the happy ones, and not necessarily, because some people really struggle with happy feelings. If there's an emotion that you are struggling with, that's a red flag, and that's something that you need to put on your detective hat and go back and figure out, what does it connect to in my past? Is it, that boss from hell? Is it that bad boyfriend from college? Is it something that happened in your childhood home? And I'm not necessarily talking about trauma. And I mean, we all understand trauma is the coronavirus right now, definitely.
Mhm.
Trauma is definitely war. Trauma is definitely extreme emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. But trauma comes in many, many shapes and sizes. Trauma can be, you were a military kid and your family moved every single school year. And so by the time you graduated from high school, you lived in over a dozen different places and you had to start over every single school year. So you just kind of learned to put up a wall. Mom and dad were happy, nobody beat you or anything like that, but that just kind of taught you to wall off the world. And so that might be your trigger. Did your parents divorce? Did you grow up with a sibling that you love very much, but he or she had a physical or emotional disability, so everything revolved around them? Now, you totally get that as an adult, but as a 3-year-old, all you kind of felt with about is that your needs didn't matter. That's a story and a pattern you might be carrying today. Or there's other people that for different reasons, they're sort of the caretakers they were of their family. And so they're literally feeling like they need to save everybody during COVID days.
Yeah.
Sometimes they grow up to be priests.
Huh.
Huh.
That might have come up in a therapist office or two before.
You know what? I want to come back to this, but I want to tell you one more cool story about the voice inside my head.
Yeah.
Okay, so the year is 2008. And I've been like doing freelance work as a writer. I write every month for Accent West, which is an Amarillo magazine, as well as some national publications like Writer's Digest and things like that. And I'm also working at St. Andrew's Church as the Christian Ed coordinator for Father Clifton Mann and Mother Joe. And so I'm doing both. I'm working part-time for the church, but I'm also, working on a novel that just wasn't going anywhere. That was the book that got rejected by well over 100 different agents. But I also got a contract job to write the quarterly newsletter for Llano Cemetery, which is the historic cemetery in Amarillo. Now, Jared, this is a cemetery I've been to countless times. My father's buried there. My grandparents are buried there. All my husband's family. I mean, I can't even count the number of times I've been there. And so I'm driving out there to meet with the staff of Llano to find out, what all things they want me to put in their first quarterly newsletter. And as it was a fall day again, as I drive past the wrought iron gates of Llano Cemetery, I hear this voice inside my head. And I can't even remember what the voice said. And I know that sounds strange, but again, writers hear voices. But I could tell it was a homeless woman. and that wasn't weird to me, because when I told my brother that I was doing this contract work for the cemetery, he told me of a story years ago growing up in Amarillo. He was a runner for a local CPA, and Llano Cemetery was one of the CPA's clients. So he would drive out there once a month to pick up their accounting books to take back to his boss, to do the accounting work. And this was when my brother was in high school. He got to know a homeless woman that lived in the cemetery. She was a single woman living alone on the streets. And so she would sneak into this cemetery every night because it, had this metal fence around it. And since people think there are hoblins and ghosts at cemeteries, no one bothered her there. She felt safe. So they got to be friends. And so every month when he would drive out there, he would stop by Burger King or McDonald's, pick up, something to eat. So if he ran into this woman, he'd give, and they just got to be friends. So I drive through the gates. I hear this homeless woman talking to me. I don't even remember what she said, but I thought, oh, that's that homeless lady that my brother told me about. I don't think anything about it. I go on to that meeting, and for some reason, I'm home alone that night. And by that time, Mark and I have kids. My daughter Mason was probably 11, which would make Luke about 8. For some reason, I'm home alone. Well, you've got kids. Being home alone in the evening, that never happens. I still to this day can't remember why I was home alone, and this woman's voice would not go away. So I got out a notebook and I started just kind of writing down what she was telling me. And I realized, I was like, oh man, this is not a homeless woman. This is a little girl. She's like about to turn 12. She and her mom live at the cemetery, and they sleep beneath the warrior angel statue. That's what she calls it. It's actually the Archangel Michael. Sleep under this statue at night to feel safer. And then they, sort of fight the big bad streets to kind of survive. But I realized this is a little girl and the mom's missing. And I'm like, where the heck is this girl's mom? And that's when I started writing the book of my first debut novel called Pennies from Burger Heaven. And that's pennies like money. That she and her mom panhandled in front of this fast food restaurant called the Burger Heaven. So it's Pennies from Burger Heaven. And that was my first novel published. It's won awards. It's got like almost 300 reviews. But that book got published in 2015, 20 years after I heard that voice that woke me from my dream. So again, when you're doing something you feel called to do, it ain't easy. It doesn't mean that, follow the yellow brick road and it's all going to be,
There's no immediacy to this. It just, you got to commit to the journey.
So wow. Sorry, I got off on that tangent, but it's just such a cool story.
I love that story. And I also love learning about a homeless woman who slept in Llano Cemetery, there's something sad and beautiful about that at the same time,
And so, I mean, I will get at least one email a week because in that series, there's 2 books, and the third of this trilogy about this little homeless girl will be published in 2021. But I mean, that it tells this story, I mean, it's really kind of a mystery. It's very fast paced, it's intense, it's funny, because this child is sassy and smart, yet innocent. And so, but it's very complimentary, because people will email me and I'll see these reviews on Amazon and other places. They'll be like, oh my, this author clearly has been homeless, she has such a heart. And I'm like, oh no, I'm such a little piece of white bread.
Well, I want to, your last book, the one you just published, it's a different kind of story.
Yes.
Why don't you share a little bit about where that came from for you.
Yeah. It's my first nonfiction book I've ever published, and it's called When Life Feels Like a House Fire: Transforming Your COVID-19 Stress. And so in August of 2017, my family had a house fire and lost our home of 17 years. And I have to pause, because when I say lost our home, it did not burn to the ground. We could have moved back there, but for different reasons, we just decided it was time, for our journey to start someplace else. But still, Jared, I was home alone when it happened, and it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. And, that was the only home that my family of four had ever lived in. My daughter Mason was 3 years old when we moved there. Luke McKay was 1 month old. It was where we had Christmases together. It was, just where we had raised our family. And just one day, we never lived there again. I woke up, it was a normal day, and then again, we just never lived there again. And I straight up fell to pieces after that. And it was the worst kind of falling to pieces, because I didn't really understand why I was struggling so much. And because one of my default stress patterns is playing a role of what I call Susie Sunshine, I didn't really share with people how much I was struggling. And I didn't understand it. I didn't understand that a fire, that's straight up trauma, And I guess I thought, since it didn't burn to the ground, the firemen, they were able to save the vast majority of our stuff. I mean, if you're going to have a house fire, totally the way to do it, So we are so blessed. But I just fell to pieces, and so I went on a journey of what I went on a journey to Humpty Dumpty myself back together again, because all the traditional things I was doing wasn't helping. Therapy saved me back in my 20s, but it just didn't help this time. I went to church more. I went to yoga more. I drank kale juice. I did everything that's supposed to help, and it just wasn't helping. So I kind of had to go on my own journey to make things better. And I did. And it was so transformative. That's when I also kind of became a life coach to help others. So when COVID hit in Texas back in March of 2020, I could so see in my family, in friends, in strangers, in articles I was reading online, I was like, this is traumatizing people, and they don't understand. We're all joking about toilet paper and, baking bread and binge watching, 16 hours of Netflix, but behind closed doors, everybody's struggling. And I thought, somebody needs to explain to them what's happening. And nobody was explaining what's happening. And so just because of my stress patterns, I kept waking up in the middle of the night, and I heard that damn voice again. And so kind of to help me sort of unpack more about the fire, I just kind of started writing. And then, it turned into a 200-page book with 20 assessments and worksheets and exercising, helping people pinpoint their stress patterns, and then more so how you can change it. Because, we can't, nobody can change their past, but we can all, start changing our todays and our tomorrows to make things better.
And that's one of the things I really appreciate about this book, is that you intertwine your story, and you're not just telling the story of your house fire. You also talk about your father, and there's other stories in there from that you've mined in your own inner work, and you're intertwining that, but you're also giving this practical, do this.
Right.
Here's a blank, answer this question.
Yeah.
the stress origins assessment, and all those kinds of things. I really appreciate that kind of stuff because there's plenty of quote unquote self-help books out there, or there's plenty of whatever you want to call the genre, but not all of them bring you into the work. Like,
Right.
here's the 3 practical things you can do with this knowledge that we've been
Right.
revealing to you. And what made you decide to take that route? Because you could have just wrote a
Memoir.
yeah, exactly. So what made you want to do that?
I guess it's kind of the life coach in me, and actually, we wear so many different hats, Jared. I mean, from back in 1995, I was the executive director of a local leadership organization. So I've been doing leadership consulting since 1996. And so, helping people, we didn't call it coaching back in 1995, we called it helping people. And so I've kind of been doing it. It's part of my personality. So I'm kind of this combination of introvert and extrovert. Part of me just wants to go away and write, because writing helps me make sense of my inner and outer world. But then I also like teaching and sharing that information with others, and it just sort of evolved. And so this book really isn't about COVID-19 stress, it's about stress. So,
Right.
if COVID has not really affected you, I am delighted for you. But if you do have stress, this book will absolutely, I think, help you. But I
Yeah.
just kind of have both these parts. I love telling stories, and I also love helping people. So writing the book means now I can sleep through the night, because I've shown how to fix this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you have some great, I mean, thus far, I think I'm in chapter 5 or 6, but at one point you say, healing is not linear.
No.
And that was a phrase that really jumped out. And I think that's really important for people who are experiencing anxiety and stress right now. Uh, and we're all going back, and I think, to our stories of origin. I think when you have time to think, and you go inside and you start looking at stuff that maybe you haven't looked at before in your life. And you start to get, and so it's good to hear someone say, hey, this isn't a nice, pretty step 1, step 2, step 3. And then you reach the end of the story. It looks non-linear.
And you know what? I think not only is healing not linear, your purpose is not linear. There are going to be lots of ups and downs, and trials and tribulations, and successes and failures. Again, just because you're doing something you feel called to do by God, whether it's go back to school, start your own business, whatever, create more intimacy in your marriage, it's not going to be easy, and it's not step 1, 2, 3. Okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
Everything is sort of cyclical.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Another great line I thought that we don't say enough, your world was not perfect before.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's important to say that, because it's a reality check for all of us.
Right.
And to see this as hard as it is a possible invitation for needed change.
Right.
So my marriage wasn't perfect before. I wasn't perfect. My job wasn't perfect before.
Right.
Could churches have the courage to say, hey, our church wasn't perfect before?
Right.
So I think that's so good to have somebody say that.
Well, thank you. And I think something else I want to encourage people, Jared. Some people don't like sort of looking at their past or stress patterns or painful things. But here's the fact. You can either feel your pain in sort of traveling backwards and connecting the dots, or if you ignore the pain, it just sort of grows. So you're going to feel pain one way or another. It's just pick your pain. And this way of ignoring it actually is worse because it'll show up in your emotions. It'll show up in stress and pain in your body. It'll show up in your behaviors. So it's actually easier, even though, it's not less pain. Even though it's still painful, it's sort of easier to go back and connect the dots, feel the feelings so you can move on, because right now it's showing up in your life anyway. You're just not acknowledging it.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Pick your pain. That's right. Marcy, we're coming up on 45 minutes here. I want to be sensitive to your time, but I want people to see. I see the book on your bookshelf up there, but do you have one closer that you could hold up to folks and tell us where they might be able to purchase it?
Everywhere books are sold online. If you just want to go to my website, marcymckay.com/books. You can get either the two novels about the little homeless girl or this one right here. So
great. Thank you so much. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you,
I
Jerry.
appreciate you.
I appreciate you.
Well, great. Well, you guys have a good Thanksgiving.
Thanks.
And look forward to seeing you again on Zoom, most likely.
More so, I look forward to seeing you in person.
Yes, I do too. I do too. Absolutely. Well,
all right, thanks for this.
Grace and peace go with you. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks be to God.